Hello, everybody. Glad to see you all again here today. Most of you must have been in my other presentation in November last year, where we talked about the role of AI as it relates to our business discipline and how it affects our actions. Today, we're going to talk about something broader. I think broader in the sense that it affects us all in a very broad way, in a more societal level. It doesn't have to do only with our own initiatives and our own way of approaching things, but it has to do with how this will affect the general societal impact. And in this topic, we're going to talk about education, how it changes, and specifically how AI is changing it, because we're in a roller coaster of developments, and what role the universities and what role your expectations should be for you to thrive in such an environment and take advantage of the opportunities of knowledge. I want to start by a thing that really stunned me about 8 years ago, in 2016. On March 9, a game started, a game of Go. Go is a much more difficult game than chess. It's considered the most difficult game that one can play. And it was a competition because the champion and one of the best players ever of Go, Dan Lee Sedol is his name, where he was giving a presentation and was over optimistic about the outcome when he was going to play against a computer that was going to compete him for the first time. This was a new experiment funded by Google and a specific team of over 7 people of names of Demis, David, Oriol, Aja, Julian, that had different specialties, now neuroscience, gameplay and learning mechanisms, neural networks. There was Fan Hui, who was a Done player as a consultant. And they all tried to build a software that could win the championship in Go. The game started at March of 9, 2016. Back then, AI was not on the table. People were speculating about it, but it was not there. And it ended on March the 15th. I was very surprised when I watched the videos of the optimistic mood of Lee Sedol, the champion, one of the best players ever to play this game, and the very sad mode he was in after losing 4-1 to the software developed by Google and being able to win only a game, the third game. So in his interview, when he spoke to the public, he said, "I'm very disappointed. I see no future in my life. I was beaten by a machine." That really stunned me and made me thinking, was he really beaten by a machine? Did the machine have that power to finish him? And all his years of training and trying were useless? But I think he made a mistake in seeing it this way. In reality, he was beaten by a group of people that spent several years working on this and building on the knowledge that existed before, that started to a large degree by um, ancient ancient Greece, by people that Aristotle and different scientists, by Newton in the way, by Einstein, by all the IT experts, and all these people that from year to year to year to year were building this knowledge that we have today. And they took all these people, over 7 people, about 20 people were in the team, but were able to put all this knowledge over years together and come with a product that had joined this knowledge of all these people. And it's like all of them were thinking together about it, about the next move. They had transferred that knowledge to a computer. So Sedol was not right that he was beaten by a computer. He was beaten by a group of people by spending years to get to the point to be able to build something that was playing better Go. And also, he was not only beaten by these 10 people, he was beaten by the hundreds and thousands of people behind them that developed this knowledge that they were able to use those days and eventually win the championship. So education has to do a lot with this. It has to do, and it is, a vehicle of building more knowledge from generation to generation. Your generation will know more and more precise knowledge and more specific knowledge and broader knowledge than your fathers and definitely and mothers and grandfathers and grandmothers. You will end up knowing more when you become older, possibly than your professors knew when they were teaching, when I telling you things today. And in that sense, education is a very important vehicle, not only of creating and improving knowledge, but also making it, packaging, organizing in a way that it can be absorbed by the new generation better and more efficiently. Now, there are things that are moving fast. We know that changes are happening rapidly. And that has to redefine the way we do education, and also has to redefine the way we approach the future of universities and the future of students. Now, Goldman Sachs, McKinsey, and the OECD made the prediction that 10 to 25% of the professors currently in all the universities around the world will not be needed. And regarding the support groups, like teaching assistants, like administrators, like management of educational institutions, will be reduced even more, because a lot of these functions will be substituted by AI. But that's not the only thing that changes. It's not only that we have to adapt to a new model of running the school. It changes because what you have to get as the new knowledge that exists has to adjust and adapt to the current circumstances. And circumstances have to change rapidly, and have changed recently. Within the last 5 years, I would say not recently only, but radically. And I want us to go a little bit back in order to understand better what's happening now, to think and look at what was happening back then, how education started, how the steps are happening, and what the adjustments have been up to today. And I have to tell you that education started many, many years ago, several thousand years BC. And initially, and we see that in tribes that are very primitive now and don't have written knowledge, there are tribes that don't have written knowledge, the education was passed by word of mouth, through stories, through teaching, through helping. In the group, education would pass from mouth to mouth. That didn't allow for much standardization, grouping information in a certain way and transferring it in a certain way. This has a lot to do, of course, with the lack of writing, the lack of being able to record something down precisely and share it with other people and have it there for next generations to see it and add to it. That's when building of knowledge starts to happen, starts to increase and improve. Improvements on the past exist, stay, are not forgotten, and the new are added. And this happened once language started to become written. This phase lasted for many, 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 many years. And this written part made those that were educated, their basic element they had was that they knew they had talked and they knew these people, they could read and they could knew this knowledge that was made. And therefore were the more valuable people in the society. This changed a lot and radically when printing started by Gutenberg. And when printing started and the ability to not only write and register some things and change something from being handwritten to being printed, allowed the mass production of text. Books started to exist, and books that were not handwritten, therefore 3 of them and very precious, but they started to be many and be shared to a broader audience. At this point, the knowledge starts to spread to most and more and more and more people. And that immediately creates an expectation of everybody to have an understanding of how things can happen because they can buy a book. Initially, books were expensive, but slowly, prices became more reasonable, as also production became easy. And as this happened, along came the need of these people to get an organized knowledge. And this organized knowledge means the creation of more structured university units instead of some philosophers teaching to some other people, and instead of only the church having the teaching institutes to the religion. And universities start to appear. As this happens, students go in there to learn. And those that were successful students were basically those that had good memory. What you learned is to learn by heart what was in the books, which allowed you, when you were working, when you were in problems, when you had to advise someone, to be able to recall things and to provide information to other people that were your teammates. So education was focused on memory. And that's why we at elementary school, we learn a lot about memorize. You go and say, memorize this, come to class. I'm going to ask you about it. I'll ask you to do the poem again, etc. This lasted for many years. And education actually, initially, was still at a level of individual. Oxford, for example, in the early 1900s, still had individual teaching. Oxford University, yes, individual teaching. So it would take, a professor would take one student and teach them, and the other one and the other one and one. All this changed. Classrooms become larger, and teaching became group teaching, which means more production-oriented, more massive, less individualistic. It wasn't focusing on individual needs and ability to understand. It was providing a formula for everybody. We have classes, my university, we have classes from 10 students to 40 and 50 students. In the university I went in Greece, we had a class of 200 students. It was a mass production. And this coincided with a change of the industrial revolution brought to society. All of a sudden, you need a lot of experts to do a lot of things because production is complex. Engineering is complex. Management of companies is complex. And this, you needed a lot of people to do that. It is also had to do also with a more broader international engagement of countries, especially UK, but also France and Netherlands, that had to do trade and had to manage countries far away. So they need to send there a management team that would manage India, that was able to know how to do management, how to count and make calculations, and how to make reports. And all this process required a large number of educated people. And that's how the more industrial, quote unquote, industrial education came in place and more larger groups. Slowly, what appeared in our situation were complex science. When, for example, in NASA, they were doing all this research about sending to the moon. In fact, when they do the nuclear research for nuclear bombs after World War II, after the 1945, they needed to do a lot of calculations. These calculations were done by teams that all their job was to do calculations, because there was no computer, no calculator. And actually, these teams, that were primarily women, by the way, were called, the people that work in that part were called computers, because they did computing by hand. Still, these people need to remember things, remember what the formula is, remember how to solve a problem to a large extent. They had their notes, but they needed memory. As computers start develop and computer can store information, memory became less important. And understanding how to use the computer and have the computer do the calculations, again, more important. And this thing lasted until the stage when we start to get online and find solutions and programs and statistical programs like like the statistical program that exists, that SPSS, for example, that do all these complex calculations for it. When I was at my doctoral program, we had to do by hand factor analysis. The computer would do it in 1 minute. A very complex process with matrices and many numbers that can happen mistakes all the time. This was canceled and substituted by SPSS, for example. Now, the same thing started happening also in other parts, like engineering, like building skyscrapers, like building bridges. You start to have the software doing the calculations for you. And this means that the ability to do math and do calculations by hand and learn and remember how to do math became secondary. What became primary is to understand which technology you should use, which program you should use, and how you will use it right. So we became from memorization and got good understanding of executing things to actually deciding which processes we need to build something. It became more of a managerial job than an execution job. This was a shift. All of a sudden, we had people graduated that never did factor analysis by hand. And one problem I have with my students now is when we run factor analysis or when we run regression, because they don't know how is it built step by step inside, they cannot really evaluate effectively. So you need to have that knowledge to understand how to interpret the data you know. But in order to do that really effectively, you need to know how the computer calculates. So the good players have an understanding of how it is, but they don't do it. Okay. We see that happening also in airplanes today. Airplanes drive on their own. And they land for some parts. And so the driver of an airplane, the pilot, doesn't have to do as much work. This lasted until recently. What happened now with AI is something very, very, very different. AI is taking you out of the step to decide which program to use and what to do and which programs to combine and what data to give, etc. AI today, to be used effectively, you have to effectively provide the question. And the question to be provided is often not so easy to make or not so easy to understand. So we're moving away now in the educational sphere from working in providing solutions to working in making questions, making the right questions, making questions that are understandable by AI and guided in the right way. And this is a big shift now. Still, the understanding of how AI gets the information and what kind of information it combines to provide you with a solution is critical, and you need to know that. But the role of the individual, starting basically today, started maybe 1 year earlier, and it will evolve rampantly, will move to basically working almost exclusively with AI to address these things. There are professions that are not being touched. Electricity is a profession that requires a human being. But everything that has to do with planning, with writing, with doing things, has to do with AI. How does that affect us? How does it affect the deliverance of education? How does it affect the classroom? I faced this problem with my courses. And there was a thing that I decided that given the new situation, there is no real point in spending endless hours trying to explain what, for example, in the market research course I was teaching this past semester, what is the reliability, what is data collection methods, what is regression. Because all this is more or less available online, in written form, in video form, and in AI form. Anyone can answer these questions and explain it to you. You can ask AI to explain to you what's reliability and what's validity and how these are critical in a research method, and do it very well. And if you're interested, you're going to learn it. So I switched the way I'm doing that course, and I said, well, we'll have one meeting in class. That's optional. We're going to talk about reliability today, and anyone that wants to come comes. You come prepared, and we have a discussion in depth. The other next meeting, we're going to have a quiz on reliability. I don't care where you learn it. I only want to see that you know it. If you know it, we're good. If you learn it through AI or you learn it online, the important is to know it. So we do have this mandatory element who has to do with learning and testing your learning. So eventually what will become more critical is not how you get your knowledge, but how much do you know it. Now in this course, in specifically the market research course, we do research projects. We run about 10 to 11 research projects, depending on the semester. This semester we had 11 research projects for companies, non-profits, and government, like the tourism department. We run real research, professional level, deliverable to the company. The students have to run this research really for real companies, present it, face the consequences, negative or positive. Also, as you realize, this is not a test. This is a project that must be successful. A company is going to rely on the information you collect. So it's a new element that comes into this picture. It's not only how you learn stuff, it's not only to demonstrate that you know your stuff, but there's a third element that requires top performance and requires the implementation of what you learn in action. And in action, not like an exercise in class, but in action that engages in real life. At that level, it's irrelevant whether you use AI or what you use. Most probably you will use AI. The issue is whether the results are accurate and your ability to discuss with the management of the company is sufficient, because they're going to ask you questions. Why do you say that customer loyalty is very low? And you have to explain which indicators say that and why that question was the right question and why the results demonstrate that effectively. So in order to create the right questions, you have to have an experience of the problem. So I think our role as institutions is to create the engagement and the experiential engagement of the topic in more or less real settings, to the extent that is possible in real settings. So these three elements, in-class exchange, individual evaluation, testing, and experiential engagement with responsibility and accountability to someone else are critical. And I say that because the grade that you all care about is a personal thing. Some courses I was getting good grades, some courses I was getting not so good grades. Consequences were to me. But when you engage in a project where three of you are working together to create a research methodology that will answer company questions that you will write present and discuss with a company, all of a sudden is not a personal thing. If one in the team doesn't work, it's irresponsibility to the others. If the team doesn't do good work, it's irresponsibility to the client. It's also hurts me because I'm supervising this. So being obliged and accountable for what you do to others makes this education more internal and therefore more effective use of the tools, the precious tools we now have like AI. You are not being tested anymore in knowing the stuff. You are being tested if you can get the results, which means you can ask the right questions. And in that way, your role as a student and as an individual later goes away as much from the execution, typical execution part. And it moves in to the more managerial CEO leader kind of role. Because no matter what you do, you have to ask the right questions. And asking the right questions means that you are aware of what the problem is, number one. You can identify the problem, number one. Possibly the most important thing anyone can do. Second, you have to see in what direction you want to solve this problem. And third, you have to provide to your employee, and I'm going to call AI your employee, your assistant. You have to provide the AI assistant with enough information and clarity of expression that will understand and provide you with the answers. With the answers that solve the problem. So our role is to create, as an educational system, to create a more accountable environment for our students. And institutions and universities have to look in that direction, in the direction of engaging real life, therefore identifying and realizing and feeling the problems that exist, and then creating the right question, formulating it, and sharing it with AI to get back a proposal. Now, my advice on that, and my advice is to educational institutions, that these answers of AI should be controlled. They have to have quality control. There should be duality. Because I'll tell you something, on the topics that I'm very well-versed, like marketing, like trust, like Greece and Athens, when I ask AI questions, I quite often get responses that are not exactly accurate, are not exactly to the point, and sometimes are very wrong, very, very wrong. When I ask questions about other countries, because I'm traveling there, or about health that I don't know much, I have some pain here, and I say, let me ask AI, what about the pain? I can't evaluate really if they're saying the right response or not. So one thing we have to integrate in this process, we said that of education we should integrate also a factor of control, quality control, which means double check, which means give another model or do a repetition to a second AI application, or a second rephrasing in the existing with a time frame between 2 days later. You will be surprised how the responses change in a few days. Also, you need to also add the sources, so you can check the sources. You can see if the sources are representative or they have a bias, not intentional, but a bias. Now, I'm not going to say that this is the only thing we do in a university. And I'm not going to say that this is the only thing that we, as an institution and as a country, see in our education. The most important thing that we should expect to come out of our educational system, and especially the universities, is valuable, responsible, mature citizens. Individuals that are positive existence in a society and contribute, can judge situations, can vote properly, can evaluate conditions, share the values of the country, share the values of the society, and are focused in sharing what they know with the rest. And this way, this thing I'm talking about has to do with the worldview, how we view the world and what we see our role in this world. And this is something that cannot be replaced by AI. And this is something that makes the classroom exchange and the meeting many different professors very valuable. Because in that way, you can see from different viewpoints, from different personalities, from different backgrounds, a more rounded perspective of our social environment and what it is to be a contributing citizen and individual. And in that sense, the soft part, not the learning part, but the becoming part, is equally, if not most important, in our university role. And this is what's going to keep the classroom alive. And that's going to be, has to be stressed in every course. I also teach a trust course. Trust in society and trust in individuals, what its role, how it happens, how you build it, etc. It's not a business course. It's a general education course. There, we go a lot with discussion and explanation and in-class experiments, psychological experiments in class that allows us to understand, absorb, and have this feeling and knowledge of what trust is. That has to do a lot with this other part I'm telling you, making right people, right citizens. That is so necessary in a society. So we have these two paths. The one that has to do more professionally and has to do with becoming more of a leader, CEO, manager, asking the right questions and providing the right support to AI to give you the right questions. And this part needs to have good, clear thinking. And the other part that has to do a lot with developing an understanding of your role as a citizen, your role as a human being in building the society, make it feel better, be happier, be richer. University have a balance to make. I have to also stress the importance of these things. That success and happiness in life and a good path in society, it does not rely only on knowing engineering, on knowing how to do market research, or knowing what is marketing. It relies in a combination of knowing how to think properly, how to distinguish between opinion and information, between value and non-value, and between understanding what the role of all of us is in this huge group we're in. And the role of in-class engagement and social engagement will always be necessary because it touches very much on the element of maturity, and the role of AI management, as we said before, is very critical, and it should rely on experience and accountability, assuming responsibility for our results, because it is not anyone else but our question that will provide the results. Thank you for the time you devoted.